Welcome back. We have David Hebb joining us. He is a counselor and the owner of Fortitude Counselling and Consulting. Welcome back to the show.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. We're into a new, fresh season of spring. It's a good time, perhaps, for many of us to think about rejuvenating the things that sometimes go stale in our relationship or that can become problems.
Absolutely. I mean, the weather we've been having lately is just, it's amazing. And I know that myself, unlike others in my neighborhood, they've been out working in their yards. And I always like to use an analogy. And I was thinking of kind of the weeds we find in our yards after the springtime, or when we reach spring. It's important that we get them out by the roots, really get a hold of them and remove them, because if we don't, you know they're going to come back. And I think we can look at our relationships a little bit like that as well. We need to look at the systemic difficulties in them sometimes and really address the root concerns so we can move forward. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a scientific method that I've used in the past. And I brought some slides with me, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time going over those.
Okay.
The first one, you know, I'm kind of titling it, How to Prevent Pitfalls and Recognize Conflictual Factors in Relationships. I focus a lot, usually every time I come on this Gottman Method. This is a method that's been developed by a researcher in the Pacific Northwest region of Seattle named John Gottman. He's done scientific research outlining the pitfalls of relationships and possible circumstances that may predict unhealthy outcomes. So the next slide talks a little bit about the first of these, which is called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. These are defined as the first one being criticism, right? Criticism in a relationship often includes aggregating factors, you know, the things that are not solution focused, circumstances that possibly target others. I have an example, something like, you know, if someone was to bring up a concern to their partner about the fact that they didn't call because they were going to be late when they were predicted to do so, instead of that partner saying, you know, you're right, I did agree that I should call and it probably made you worried, they say, well, you always worry all the time and you're always so worried about what I'm doing. Maybe you should just focus on yourself. Things like that are kind of identifiers of criticism in a relationship. Moving on to something like contempt. Contempt is often rife with things like sarcasm and cynicism. You know, it really defeats relationships. It looks at, you know, we often make the reference of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is so true in contempt situations. Physical examples would include things like eye rolling, sneering, mockery. A possible type of example might be when someone's saying they've had a long day and they're looking for some empathy from their partner. Their partner says, well, I've had a long day too, and look at all the things I've done. Turns into a bit of a competition and really leads to difficulties.
And nobody's feeling happy with that.
Not at all.
No,
not at all. Moving on. We're looking at number 3, defensiveness. You know, looking at things like explaining and defending your own opinion, using words like "it's not me, it's you," or "if you would only," or "if how about you know, how come you did this," or "why didn't you do that?" It ends up in people feeling like they're not aligned with their partner and that they have to compete. And when we're defensive, we lose track of what's important. And then finally, stonewalling. Stonewalling is usually when one partner actually tunes themselves out completely from the conversation and they choose to either no longer engage or remove themselves from the environment. This can be healthy in some ways if it's just driven by anger, but there needs to be a reintroduction of productive conversation. Moving forward with, okay, we were angry at each other and that's okay, but now we need to come forward with something that's going to resemble conflict management and moving forward with realistic goals.
Absolutely. I think it's important for people to remember these 4 things, because if you can, and you really think about those things before you know, have a conflict with your partner, you can really avoid a lot of disappointment and anger. It's so true. It's true.
And if you don't think about them regularly, they're easy. It's like the calm duck on top of the water, but underneath the legs are paddling like crazy to try and keep up.
Okay, we have 2 more slides.
Yeah, I brought forth, of course, we can't just talk about negative. We need to talk about ways that we can invest in our relationship to make things better. And I usually focus on listening. You know, when we listen with intent and make time for what matters, people feel that they've been heard. Use nonverbal communications, you know, head bobbing, eye contact, paraphrasing, making it so that people are able to understand that feeling heard feels good and that you genuinely want to make things better. Don't try and fix. Often we rush to judgment, try and influence, and we need to allow time for feelings before looking at actions. Make sure people feel heard before you try and fix the situation.
Yeah.
And lastly, proceed with a plan. Have an understanding. something that encourages mutual change, things that are a compromise. Not everybody's always going to get what they want. A relationship can't be seen as a competition. So look at, ways of gentle accountability techniques and ways to check in regularly. And lastly, agree to move on and be genuine. If you're not ready, that's okay, but it needs to be constructive techniques of moving forward instead of just being, kind of angry. So yeah.
You know what, even if you get half of that stuff right, your relationship would be golden, I think.
Yeah, it's true. And I am a therapist, and I think that there's value behind working constructively on things prior to them becoming too much of a difficult circumstance in a couple's relationship. So that preventative maintenance, something I always talk about, is always so key, and something I find is the best way of working on things.
All right, dig out the weeds by the roots. David Hebb, very great to have you here today. Information is on the screen if you would like to get a hold of David. We are back after a quick break. Stay with us.